Hello, I'm Tael, and welcome to Tael Talk. Today I'd like to talk to you about a literally little game called Donkey Kong Land 2 for the original Game Boy. Donkey Kong Land 2 was released on the Game Boy in 1996, 1 year after Donkey Kong Land 1, and once again it's not actually a port of Donkey Kong Country 2, much like Donkey Kong Land wasn't a port of Donkey Kong Country 1, but it sticks a lot closer to the formula the Donkey Kong Country 2 laid down than the original Land ever did. Personally for me, going back to this game was a bit of a nostalgic experience. This was the first brand new game I ever owned. Now, as a kid I was a Nintendo kid. My first system however was a Sega Master System, which was a hand-me-down, and all the games that I had for that were lent to me by family friends, so I never actually owned any new games for that system. But I do remember going with my parents into the local toy world and actually picking up a green Game Boy Pocket with a copy of Donkey Kong Land 2. And the reason I wanted Donkey Kong Land 2 was because my cousin had a Super Nintendo with Donkey Kong Country 2, and I had been watching him play that game and I was absolutely fascinated by it, and getting the Game Boy Pocket with Donkey Kong Land 2 was as close to that experience as I could get. And, you know, I think I made the right choice, really, because that game lasted me quite a while. That said, I want this review to be objective, so I'm going to remove my rose-tinted glasses, and I'm going to look at this game for what it actually is. And going back to this game now, it doesn't quite hold up as well as my memories had made me think that it would. So in terms of improvements from the original Donkey Kong Land, there are actually a bunch of improvements, which is good. That's what you want with a sequel. Usually the second one in a series of games is the best, and it's interesting to see that that's just as relevant all the way back here in the early 90s as it is in today's gaming, where it seems like nothing has changed. So in terms of actual feel, the game feels a lot tighter, it feels a lot more responsive, it feels a lot smoother. Just overall, it runs a lot better, and it feels a lot more like you're playing a Donkey Kong Country game than the original did. The original felt close, but there was just something clunky and slow about it. This game's lightning fast, and it actually feels just like its Super Nintendo counterpart, which, considering the limitations of the 8-bit Game Boy hardware, is actually really impressive. Likewise, another issue with the original Donkey Kong Land that I had was how detailed the graphics were. They were detailed to a fault where you couldn't actually see anything unless you were playing it on a Game Boy Color like I did. That wasn't an option for me as a kid because I only had a Game Boy Pocket. And thankfully this game actually stripped down the backgrounds a lot, so they're a lot more simplistic, and while you could argue that because now they're less detailed, the graphics are less impressive, I think it helps the game a lot. It means that there's a lot less slowdown for one thing, and it also makes the characters a lot easier to distinguish on the screen than it was in the original game, where sometimes a character could get completely lost in the background. So it's amazing how actually toning down the graphics and making them less impressive actually improved the game, and there's not many cases where that's actually how things go, and I think really the Game Boy, because of its monochromatic screen, is probably the only place where you'll really run into that as being a positive thing. Now, something that might be divisive for some people on this is the stripped down approach it took from Donkey Kong Country 2. Donkey Kong Country 2 introduced a lot of gimmicks into the gameplay, not quite as much as the Donkey Kong Country 3 did, which I'll get to someday, but it definitely introduced a lot more ideas into the mix instead of just straight platforming. The original Donkey Kong Country was essentially limited to platforming from left to right and then the very occasional minecart level. So Donkey Kong Country 2 introduced verticality to the level design, it introduced different ways of using the animal bodies, just introduced a lot of flying as squawks, it introduced a lot of different elements. And Donkey Kong Land 2 on the Game Boy, because of the limitations of the hardware, couldn't do a lot of these. It could do some of them, such as the levels where the water is supposed to be like toxic, and you have to try and up these sails to try to get out of the way of the poison water. They solve this issue by just making the water a darker color, which kind of implies that there's something wrong with it. But overall, a lot of the gimmicky stuff is left, and I feel like Donkey Kong Land 2 is a much more stripped down platforming experience. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I think it feels a little bit more focused because of the limitations. It is essentially limited to running from left to right or from the bottom to the top. And I kind of like that sort of feel to it. It doesn't get to do quite as much messing around as Donkey Kong Country 2 did. I'm not saying that the messing around Donkey Kong Country 2 is a bad thing at all. I think it's the best game in the series. But I do like that stripped down approach to Donkey Kong Land 2, and I think it adds its own little level of charm to it. Something else that this game did that the original Land couldn't do is it brought over all of the animal bodies. In the original game, all you had was Espresso the Ostrich and Rambi the Rhino, and it was nice that they were there, but it would have been nice if On Guard and Squawks who I guess would have been difficult to pull off in a monochromatic Game Boy game, were in it, but they weren't. So, in the sequel, they all are. Unfortunately, you don't actually get to ride the animals, which was something that they introduced in Donkey Kong Country 2, and I was kind of miffed when they included these levels. I know the levels were designed around being the animals as opposed to riding them, but still, there's a degree of charm that comes from riding the animal bodies that you don't get when you become one of the animal bodies, but I mean, it's pretty easily forgiven. Of course, due to the limitations of the Game Boy, it makes more sense to just turn you into the animal all the time, and so that's what they did, and the level design sort of reflects that. So I guess that's a bit of a take it or leave it thing. I'm glad that all the critters are there except for the anglerfish, I forget his name, but he's on Gleamer, I think it is. He's on the front cover of the game, but he isn't actually in the game, which is kind of hilarious. But I think he's the only animal body that didn't quite make it into the game. And even like characters like the seal, is a Clapper the seal? The fact that he's in the game, which once again, like he was used in the original Donkey Kong Country 2 to cool down hot water and to freeze water, and of course conveying that in a Game Boy is really hard when you only have 4 shades of grey. But they managed to make him work, and they managed to make that level work, so, you know, mad props to Rare for pulling that stuff off and for including all the animals, making them all useful. That said, there are some things about the game that I did find disappointing going back to it now. Some of these things are issues that I'm only just realizing now that I'm older, and others are because I've just played through Donkey Kong Land before playing through this one. But the main issue I had with it was that, unlike the original, this game actually has no new levels or worlds or enemies. And this is because, as I said earlier, it's very much closer to a Super Nintendo counterpart than the original one was. So if you watch my review of the original Donkey Kong Land, it was supposed to be like a sequel to Donkey Kong Country, and it introduced some new enemies, some new areas, and that sort of thing. And I liked that aspect of it, even though the game itself wasn't fantastic. Donkey Kong Land 2 sticks way too close to Donkey Kong Country for me, and even though it's not a port, it feels like it's trying to be a close approximation. And I can respect that, but at the same time it's also a little bit disappointing, and I wish they kind of done more. Most of the enemies from the Super Nintendo, not all of them, but most of them do make it into the game, and all the levels are basically laid out the same in terms of the overworld map and where they occur on the map. And it just, yeah, it feels kind of like a downsized port rather than its own game, and I think that is hard to knock the game for that, but at the same time I can't help but feel a little bit disappointed about it. Likewise, there's no new music in the game. Donkey Kong Land had some new tracks which were done by Grant Coco specifically for the game, but Donkey Kong Land 2 doesn't do that. It has basically just some scaled back versions of what you found on the Super Nintendo. And unfortunately, due to the size constraints of the Game Boy, they actually use a number of tracks in multiple levels, so it's not like Donkey Kong Country 2 where you get a different track for every environment. Instead, yeah, a lot of tracks get recycled from multiple environments, and those can kind of make the tracks a little bit more repetitive than they would have been otherwise, especially the main area. I noticed it was actually in the lava world, where the same track gets used in the lava stage as it does in the mineshaft stage, and that entire world is made up essentially of those two environments, so you're just listening to that one track for a good 5 or 6 levels, and it kind of gets a little bit old. That said, Grant Coco did once again return to try to get the Super Nintendo sound onto that Game Boy, and he did a really commendable job. And I actually remember as a kid plugging my Game Boy through the headphone jack into a cassette player and actually recording the soundtrack to Donkey Kong Land 2 onto a cassette so I could listen to it in the car, which I don't know that my mum actually appreciated, but she let me play it occasionally. So that's how much I thought of the soundtrack as a kid. Going back to it now, better just stick to the Super Nintendo one. Some other sacrifices that were made to make it fitted onto the Game Boy. The Lava World and the Marsh World are now combined. I don't know that this is necessarily a negative. It just seems to be compressing the game a little bit, but I don't understand what mixing these two together does. Maybe they just needed to save up some space on the cartridge, and making those two worlds into one world with the one end boss was the easiest solution to do that. I don't really know. I don't think it's negative, it's just weird. Unfortunately, the game is very, very easy though. Donkey Kong Country 2, I remember taking me and my cousin quite a few months to beat, especially towards the end there it gets difficult, and that's without even looking into the Lost World. But Donkey Kong Land 2 as a kid, I finished it in about a week, which when it's your first Game Boy game is kind of disappointing. I mean, finishing that game in a week now blows my mind, because I can finish it in just a little bit over 2 hours. But back then I was like, wow. That said, I hadn't found the Lost World and that sort of thing, that was just a BK rule, but the game does feel a lot easier than its Super Nintendo counterpart, and I don't know if that's because of the limitations of the hardware and it just can't do the more intricate level design or what, but it is a small issue. And likewise another issue, and this is a really particular one. So the original Donkey Kong Land, it lets you save if you collect all the Kong letters in a level. It was frustrating, but at least you could save after every level if you did get the Kong letters. Donkey Kong Land 2 includes the same save functionality as Donkey Kong Country 2, where you need to have 2 save coins and you need to unlock all the levels up to Wrinkly's little save school so you can pay her to save. And that's fine on the Super Nintendo. I mean, if you need to go out somewhere, you can just pause it and leave it and walk out and whatever. The Game Boy, you can't do that. It's a portable system that uses batteries, and not being able to save after every level is friggin' infuriating. As a kid, I remember like just trying to beat a particular level and the batteries had cut out, and so I would have lost the last 4 levels worth of gameplay. And that sort of thing is a terrible design choice for a portable system, and it still frustrates me now. It frustrates me in the Super Nintendo version, but at least now on the Virtual Console I can use save states. The Game Boy, not so much. It's just super inconvenient. And lastly, the only other real issue I found with it, and this is an issue that the original Donkey Kong Land 2 had as well, is that sometimes the graphics glitch out, and I get the feeling it's just because of how complex the sprites are that the Game Boy has a hard time rendering them accurately sometimes, especially when there's a lot going on. There seems to be stray pixels that pop out all over the place. That's not a deal breaker, but it is a kind of interesting glitch because I've never noticed it in any other Game Boy game before. It's just these 3, and I don't know if it's the engine or if it's the complexity of the sprites, but it's an interesting little bug, and it's worth pointing out. So overall, yeah, it's interesting. Donkey Kong Land 2 is nowhere near as creative or fresh as the original Donkey Kong Land, but at the same time it feels a lot better and it's arguably a lot funner to play. It's a shame that it didn't improve the gameplay of the original Donkey Kong Land and take it in that direction of making it a sequel to, say, Donkey Kong Country with new levels and new enemies and that sort of thing. I am disappointed that it sticks so close to what Donkey Kong Country 2 did, instead of trying to do its own thing. But that said, the improved controls and visuals make that an understandable sacrifice considering the development time. Do I recommend the game or not? If you have a European 3DS, so you can get it on the Virtual Console, it's worth picking up if you're interested in playing a bit of Donkey Kong on the go. But other than that, not really. I'd recommend just picking up Donkey Kong Country 2. It's a far superior game. What are your thoughts on Donkey Kong Land 2, or the Donkey Kong Land series in general? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you for hanging out with me and checking out Tael Talks, and I'll see you next week. Have a good one.